Oh, is that how it worked? Yeah, that'll work. They avoid that word design because then some kid's going to say, who's the designer? And that might bring up an embarrassing situation in class, so let's just avoid using the word design. Now look, I have a Casio Databank stopwatch. It holds 300 phone numbers. It's a calculator, a stopwatch, an alarm clock, and a countdown timer. It does not tell time. You have to look at it. But it's an amazing machine. $70 at Walmart. I was in Japan only one time, but I never did see the guy who made the Casio Databank stopwatch. But I suspect there is a guy who made it. Is it logical for me to stand here in Wisconsin and say, I believe there's a designer for this watch? Even though I've never met him? I mean, is that logical? Sure. Now, is it logical for me to stand here and say, you know, I never seen the guy who made this, therefore he doesn't exist? That's not logical, is it? Some people look at the world around them and say, you know, I can't see God who made it, therefore he doesn't exist. Hello, you better think about that. You don't have to see the designer to believe he exists. The design demands a designer. It's interesting that evolutionists argue against design using arguments they designed. One guy wrote a whole book called The Blind Watchmaker. He said it could have happened over billions of years. Well, why'd you write a book about it then? Why don't you throw a bunch of ink out in a paper and see if it made your book? Michael Behe's got a great book showing the complexity of nature and how it simply could not have survived. It could not have happened by chance. He's a microbiologist, and he teaches at Lehigh University in Pennsylvania. He spends an entire chapter of the book explaining the hair on a bacteria. That little hair is attached to a motor in the skin of the bacteria. You talk about tiny. I mean, bacteria is pretty tiny. These are real tiny little motors. These motors are so tiny that 8 million of them would fit in the cross-section of a human hair. And that motor turns 100,000 RPM. I've done a lot of automotive work in my time. I've rebuilt a few motors. How would you like to have a motor that turns 100,000 RPM? The guy who's third in the nation got saved, third in the nation racing motorcycles, got saved in my seminar one time. A couple of years later, I was preaching up there in Connecticut. He said, hey, Brother Hovind, let me take you to breakfast tomorrow and let you test drive one of my bikes. I said, okay, I like motorcycles. We went for breakfast. We got out to his van. He pulled out of the trailer behind his van a Honda 900. It had been blueprinted and bored and stroked and balanced. I don't know what all they did to it, but it was not the normal Honda 900. He said, take it for a spin, Brother Hovind. I said, okay. Red line's about 14 or 15,000 RPM. I cranked it up. Boom. I thought, ooh, this is not normal. Put it in first gear and let out the clutch and almost broke my neck. I took off down the road. I shifted into second gear. Almost broke my neck again. I was just about to go to third, and I glanced down and realized I'm going 90 in second gear, and it has 6 gears. I wound it down, brought it back, shaking like a leaf. See, I have a Honda moped. That weren't no moped. I said, man, how fast does it go? He said, I don't know. Oh, brother. I said, they don't make Band-Aids big enough. I said, what's the fastest you've ever fallen off? He said, 120. I said, what's it like to fall off at 120? He said, well, it gets hot. You got to keep turning your body because that spot gets hot sliding across the blacktop. Oh, yeah. That was only like 14,000 RPM. This bacteria's motor turns 100,000 RPM forwards or backwards. Amazing. That little bacteria can swim through his little world the equivalent of a person swimming 60 miles an hour through peanut butter. Because the smaller you get, the greater the viscosity problem becomes. Now, this textbook says, humans probably evolved from bacteria that lived more than 4 billion years ago. Folks, they can swim 60 miles an hour. The fastest human swimmer can go about 4 or 5 miles an hour through water. You need to sign these guys up for the Olympics, man. We're getting worse, not better. Bacteria are incredibly complex. Complexity demands a designer, whether you like it or not. They tell the kids, yes, life evolved from non-living material. Look at this one. The Bible says God created the living creature. Textbook says the history of life began on earth 3.5 billion years ago. How this occurred has been and will continue to be a topic for inquiry. Let me give you the Hovind translation. It's okay to inquire how life evolved. It is not okay to inquire if life evolved. That's what they're trying to say to the kids, isn't it? Hey kids, it's okay to do research on how we evolved, but don't you dare question the fact that we did evolve. Not only can kids not pray in school, they can't even think in school anymore. Miller and Urey wanted to know how the Earth and solar system had come to be. So they made an experiment 50 years ago. It said he never proved how life originated. But he did add evidence to the theory that life could have started by itself. This is a lie. Miller and Urey's experiment, and everybody since then, has made the problem much worse. See, Darwin thought a cell in your body was a little simple sack of jelly. Now we know cells are incredibly complex, and life could not have started by chance. The origin of species was not addressed in 1859 and is still a mystery in 1998. Both the origin of life and the origin of major groups of animals remains unknown. They don't know how life got started. But the textbooks will tell the kids, life got started from non-living material. This one says, many important events occurred during the Archean era, the most important of which was the evolution of life. Progress from complex molecules to the simplest living organism was a very long process. Oh yeah, let's put time in there, that'll help. This textbook says the first self-replicating, or first living cells emerged between 4 billion and 3.8 billion years ago. There is no record of the event. We know what happened, kids, and you're going to be tested on this, but there's no proof. He says the first self-replicating systems must have emerged in this organic soup. That's a lie. There's no proof from any field of science of how life got started from non-living material. Now, if you want to believe it evolved, you just enjoy yourself, but don't call it science and don't tell people you know how it happened. Nobody does. Haeckel, during his confession at the University of Jena, said, spontaneous generation must be true, not because it had been proven in the laboratory, but because otherwise it would be necessary to believe in a creator. Oh, you're right about that, Ernie. Must have been a creator. So a question, have scientists really produced life in the laboratory? Here's the experiment they did. Miller and Urey took gases. They took methane, ammonia, water vapor, and hydrogen, circulated them through some glass tubes, and ran a spark in there to say this is like lightning. At the bottom, some red goo developed, and so they filtered it off and saved all the red goo at the bottom of the flask. They said the goo was rich in amino acids. This is a lie, okay? It was not rich in amino acids. It's interesting to notice they excluded oxygen from the experiment. They didn't want any oxygen in there because they knew if they had oxygen, anything they created would oxidize. You know, you cut the banana open, lay it on the table, it turns brown, it oxidizes. If you don't paint your car, it oxidizes. It's called rust. They didn't want any oxygen there because it would destroy any life that evolved. The problem is, if you don't have oxygen, you can't have ozone. And ozone blocks UV light, and UV light destroys ammonia. And ammonia is one of the gases. So if you don't have oxygen, life can't evolve. And if you do have oxygen, life can't evolve. Got a real serious problem here. And by the way, the Earth has always had oxygen. Even if you believe the dumb geologic column, the lowest layers have oxygen. This guy says, what is the evidence for a primitive methane ammonia atmosphere? The answer is there is no evidence for it and much against it. In general, we find no evidence in the sedimentary distribution of the rocks of oxygen-free atmosphere. Don't let them tell you that's true. But this textbook says, yes, boys and girls, back when there was no oxygen, 0% oxygen, the rocks absorbed it. Say, what? There was no oxygen, but the rocks absorbed it. The cheese done fell out of their sandwich, man. I'm telling you, that elevator don't go all the way to the top. And then 2 billion years after the origin of life, there was enough oxygen to support the eukaryotes. Slowly evolved to today. This is pure propaganda. What Miller did in his experiment, and Urey, and everybody since, they filter out the product they produce. This is not realistic for nature. What they actually made was 85% tar, 13% carboxylic acid. Both of those are toxic to life. Now, if you make an experiment that's 98% poisonous to the other 2% you're trying to make, would you say that's a success? Actually, what he generally made was 2 amino acids. There are 20 necessary for life. He made basically 2 in a poisonous mixture. He filtered out the product. That's not realistic. He made these amino acids, but they will bond with the water and the tar and the acid much quicker than they will bond with each other. Amino acids are sort of like letters of the alphabet. You know, there are 26 letters in the English alphabet. With combining those 26, you can make all kinds of words, if you get them in the right order. You can also just drop letters and make a whole bunch of nonsense stuff too, you know. He made a few amino acids. It's like making a few letters of the alphabet. There are 20 amino acids required to make proteins. He just made a few of them. These amino acids are like letters. It takes a bunch of them to make